He knows it's illegal. He knows it's unconstitutional. We filed suit to hold him accountable. And it's an issue of constitutionality and the rule of law at the end of the day.
Welcome to the Bailey Wire Podcast, where we open the files on the biggest legal stories in Missouri. We'll explore what these issues mean in simple terms, how they impact you, and give insight into the actions by the Missouri Attorney General's Office. Here's your host, Brandon Rathert.
Welcome to the Bailey Wire. I am your host, Brandon Rathert, and this is going to sound familiar. Student loans is what we're covering on the Bailey Wire today. You know, we've done this before, and now we're going back. Tell us more about this case.
Well, this is another attempt by this administration to unconstitutionally and illegally redistribute wealth in this country. And I think there's something telling. I mean, this is really kind of the second, third, fourth iteration. When I say this is a constitutional issue, the Constitution gives the power of the purse to the legislative branch of government, Congress. If that amount of wealth, if it is the policy position of the United States government to redistribute that much wealth, that is a decision that has to be made by the legislative branch and then signed into law by the executive branch, not unilaterally done by the flick of a pen on the executive level. The president knows that. He tried to get a bill through Congress when he first was elected president, and then he unlawfully tried to use the HEROES Act, which was a legislation from the early 2000s that was designed to assist soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines who served in the War on Terror in how they repaid student loans that they took out before they served in the military. But again, the key to the HEROES Act was it allowed for amendment to repayment terms. It didn't allow for cancellation of the debt. We took that all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that, at the end of the day, the president has no authority to unilaterally redistribute that amount of wealth, and if he's going to claim to have that authority, he's got to pinpoint explicitly where Congress authorized that, a program of that social, economic, and political magnitude. He can't do it.
So what is their argument in saying, well, but this time it's different? What is the argument that they're trying to use? Saying, well, this time it's different. We're going to be fine this time.
Sure, yeah. Well, he's changed the terms of the cancellation program. It is broader than the previous program, but he's also pinpointed a different federal statute. Now he's pointing at the Higher Education Act, which I believe was passed in the 1960s. And so clearly he's going back to the same well where there is no water. The Congress doesn't hide an elephant in a mouse hole. In other words, that's the holding from the previous decision where the Supreme Court blocked Biden from redistributing this kind of wealth and told him that if he's going to do this, he's got to point to explicit congressional authority and statute. There is no explicit congressional authority. I mean, he's got to get a bill done. He knows that. He's failed to do that. And so he keeps going back. What's frightening to me is two things. Number one, he's no longer even calling it debt forgiveness. He's calling it cancellation. And any small business owner or working family out there will tell you there's no such thing as debt cancellation. Somebody's paying that off. Nobody's getting their debt canceled. Somebody has to pay it off. And so we can't let President Biden saddle working Missouri families with Ivy League debt. The other problem I've got is that now that the president has been rebuked by the United States Supreme Court, he's trying to do the exact same thing again and again. He's changed the program around the margins and pointing to a different statute, but essentially it's the same problem. And he's bragging about how the Supreme Court told him no and he's going to do it anyway. I mean, at what point does this become a constitutional crisis? And at what point do we call this what it is, an attempt to buy votes? I mean, if you look at the polling right now, President Biden is losing ground substantially in the 18 to 30-year-old demographic nationwide. And that's a demographic he has to have in order to secure re-election. He's losing that to President Trump. And so this is clearly an attempt to buy off those voters. He knows it's illegal. He knows it's unconstitutional. We filed suit to hold him accountable. And it's an issue of constitutionality and the rule of law at the end of the day.
Because I can have moral qualms with this. And I would think, in my opinion, a lot of Americans, they have a moral qualm with this whole idea. Did you pay off your student debt?
You know what? I went to school on an Army ROTC scholarship, served my nation in the United States Army in the War on Terror, and then went back to law school on the post 9/11 GI Bill. So this is personal for me. I mean, at the end of the day, I felt like I paid for my school in blood, sweat, and tears in service to our nation. It was a privilege to get to do that, and I learned a lot about myself and leadership skills in that process and that experience. But nothing's free. When I say that no debt is canceled, somebody pays it. That's what I'm talking about. And This is very personal for me. I get it. There are a lot of people that approach me and say, well, now come on. I mean, some people, they want their student loans paid off for them. Fine. Even if you think that is the proper policy position, surely we can all agree in the constitutional structure that decision has to be made in Congress, not through administrative action by the president.
And so and that kind of brings me to my point, because I think there's two different things that happen here. People say, well, don't we want to pay off the debt for students and all that? And it sounds great and it sounds peachy keen, but there's still a cost to it. And I would think a lot of these good people that have, a sorrowful heart and, we got to pay this off. There is the law, and good people abide by the law. And your contention is the law says, Mr. Biden, you simply cannot do that. That's the Constitution. So it's not, I guess the point I'm getting at, people might say, well, it's mean to not want to have this happen, but it's the law.
Yeah, and I would submit that it's mean to saddle working families with that kind of Ivy League debt. But beyond that, it's mean to violate the law and create this kind of lack of accountability, lack of consistency. If the words that are written down in the statutes that are enacted by our legislative bodies and then signed into law by our executive branches of government at the federal and state level, if those words don't mean anything, there is no rule of law. It undermines the predictability and consistency of our entire way of interacting with one another. And so that is enormously problematic.
Yeah. And so we think about it in these terms, where there's no rule of law, and there could be, let's say that somebody listening to the Bailey Wire podcast with us right now. I'm Brandon Rather. By the way, our guest is Missouri Attorney General Bailey, and right now we're talking about the latest attempt to do away with student loans. They, by the way, they don't get done away with. Somebody, i.e. you and I, are paying for them. But there comes a day when there might be a law that you think, oh, this is a great idea, but when it impacts you, you can always point to simply, here's the law. It's without passion. It's without emotion.
Yeah.
This is the law.
Right. And at the end of the day, to your point, we're talking about $500 billion nationally. Here in the state of Missouri, we're talking about north of $40 million that's owed to the state of Missouri. I mean, the state of Missouri will be harmed. And so our General Assembly will have to find a way to plug a $40 million hole in the state budget to cover what President Biden's doing. That's how we can prove that Missourians are harmed by the president's unlawful action.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Bailey. When you're looking at this and you're like, oh, we've done this again as it relates to student loans, and this is the cool part that I love about the Bailey Wire podcast, because we get more time to go behind the scenes and maybe talk about, to the extent that we can, some of the thought processes that come out of the home office in Jefferson City. What's the thought process in saying, yes, this is worth going after, or no, maybe we shouldn't go after that? And forgive me for using the phrase going after that, but that's the best phrase that comes to my mind. What's the thought process with the brain trust inside the Missouri Attorney General's office on cases like that?
Yeah, well, first of all, our state Solicitor General Josh Devine, who was one of the most brilliant attorneys in the state of Missouri, clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas on the United States Supreme Court. Most recently was general counsel for Senator Josh Hawley. So he is a brilliant legal mind. He has a network of fellow solicitors general across the United States of America that work in like-minded attorneys general's offices. And sometimes it's a lawsuit, sometimes it's a cease and desist letter, sometimes it's other advocacy. But in this instance, there are really two parallel lawsuits going on at the same time. The state of Kansas has formed a coalition that has filed a suit, and the state of Missouri has formed a coalition and has filed suit. And so Kansas and Missouri are leading on this issue. I'm proud to be leading the coalition here in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. And I think that's an important part of the strategy, too, is that when you have two lawsuits in two different Court of Appeals, you first of all, you're more likely to get into it in front of a judge more quickly. Secondly, you increase your likelihood of being able to make it all the way to the United States Supreme Court. So by kind of dividing those efforts out on this issue, we increase the likelihood of quicker action. We've got to move quickly, because at the end of the day, the president will start cutting checks, which will then start incurring costs here at the state of Missouri. And that harm will happen very rapidly. So we need an injunction. And at the end of the day, baseball games run as quickly as the umpires of the game allow them to run. And it's the same thing with the judiciary. The judiciary, the judges and the court staff are the umpires. And so our ability to get in front of a judge is somewhat dictated by the judicial process. And so, again, dividing that process out into two different courts is a good strategy.
Speaking of strategy, when we return, let's dive into the upcoming argument with our Solicitor General, Josh Devine. He is Missouri's Solicitor General. He was Chief Counsel to U.S. Senator Josh Hawley. Also clerked on the Missouri Supreme Court for Justice Thomas and on the 11th Circuit Court. What was that like, clerking for Justice Thomas?
So that was the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was just a tremendous privilege, honor, and also one of those things that has you waking up every day pinching yourself because you just can't believe you're there. And to be able to work for somebody like Justice Thomas, who was, he was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court when I was a baby, and then 30 years later, I found myself clerking for him. It was just a tremendous privilege, and to be able to serve the people of the United States in that capacity.
The office has been passionate about student loan programs, and I know this is something that personally you are passionate about. As a matter of fact, we went more than once to the federal government. We said, hey, you can't do this. We've had some successes along the way. Two-pronged question: why is it important to citizens that say we are not affected by whether or not we get to take advantage of student loan forgiveness? Why does it matter to everybody, and why are you so passionate about it?
Yeah, I'll take those in order. So I think this is really a critical case. I mean, it's astonishing. This is the second time we've brought suit against the federal administration over this. So you have one statute, and it creates forgiveness, but there are certain conditions. The forgiveness is available only in certain circumstances. You have to pay your loans for 10 years under one program, 20 years under the other, and then the remainder is forgiven. And that's what Congress passed back in the 90s. That's what the people decided we're going to have. And then you have this other statute that doesn't even mention forgiveness at all. And now you've got the federal government coming in and saying, oh, actually, we can use this to ignore the entire program that Congress has created. And we can forgive everything. We can forgive 100% through this program without Congress ever saying anything. And, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but, we're sliding down this path where the presidents are trying to act like they're kings, right? This program is $500 billion. The last program was $500 billion. So you put these together and you have the President of the United States basically saying, I can wave my wand and spend $1 trillion without Congress saying anything. And that's not what presidents are supposed to be doing. If you're going to have something major like this, that's something that the people through their elected representatives should have a say in. And look, I would benefit from these. I've got way more debt than I'd like to say here, but the principle is the larger point. Are we going to be a country where we make these decisions democratically, or are we going to be a country where one person can just ignore the program that Congress created and decide to spend $1 trillion?
So again, we're going back to the Constitution of the United States of America. Is it going to be your representative or one man like it used to be in England? That's what we're going back to.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, and I always, for me, I think that's a good reminder, because a lot of these things, obviously, by their very nature, they become political, and then there's sides, and I don't subscribe to that. The law is the law. The Constitution is the Constitution, and that is one of the responsibilities of the Missouri Attorney General's office: defend the Constitution, uphold the law, right?
That's exactly right. It's the core purpose of the office. It's the thing that I wake up every day trying to figure out, how are we going to defend the Constitution today? That's what I did when I clerked for Justice Thomas. We were preserving the Constitution every day. That's what I do here in this office as well.
What was that like the first time arguing in front of the Missouri Supreme Court?
Well, so I'm Solicitor General now. The first time I argued in front of the Missouri Supreme Court, I was a Deputy Solicitor General. And I had clerked on the 11th Circuit. I was only about a month into this job as Deputy Solicitor General. So it's the first real job after a clerkship. And I find myself up at the Missouri Supreme Court, and it's like, it's just wow, the opportunity to be able to do something like that. My friends who work in private practice, they don't get to do those sorts of things, especially, somebody who was barely a year out of law school. Now I find myself in front of the Missouri Supreme Court arguing this case. I don't even really remember much what the case was about, other than that I got to be there and arguing in front of this august body.
So how many times prior to that had you argued in courtrooms?
So I had argued twice, once in law school, and then I'd argued about a month before in the intermediate appellate court.
So third time you really argued in court, and it was the Missouri Supreme Court.
That's right.
How about that? Josh Devine, our Solicitor General, Missouri Attorney General's office. I'm going to ask what it is you've been nerding out about recently or what it is you've been reading. But is there anything else that you would like to add here on the Bailey Wire podcast before we let you go?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a privilege to be able to serve the people of Missouri every day. I mean, I worked here as a Deputy Solicitor General for about a year and a half. Then I worked for U.S. Senator Josh Hawley for 3 years in that capacity, serving the people of Missouri. And then when I got the call, about a year and a half ago now, to come back to this office, I just couldn't wait. I love what I do. I love being able to serve the people in this capacity.
Is that the thing you like best about the job, being of service to other people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, almost all my friends are in private practice. I won't tell you how much money they make, but whatever they're making doesn't cover the spread of the, just the immense privilege I feel in being able to work directly for the people.
And what is it that you've been nerding out about recently?
Well, I think in the last 2 months or so, I've really started reading on this track of, I guess I'll call them books about thinking. So I read a book called The Power of Habit, for example, which talks about physiologically what happens to your brain when you're building habits. I've another book I just finished a couple days ago called Originals talks about the mindset, the things that you can do in your life to become a little bit more creative. So often I'll find myself reading books about a specific topic, and I'll do 6 or 8 of them, and then I'll shift to another topic.
All right, and that's the topic that our Solicitor General for the Missouri Attorney General's office, Josh Devine, that's what he's into now. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Till next time, we'll catch you on the Bailey Wire podcast. I'm Brandon Rathert.